For anyone who is joining us now, we are killer thrillers writers, and we're going to be talking all about thrillers and YA spooky books a little bit as well. So please welcome Andrena Cordani, Sera Milano, and hopefully Vincent Ralph will be able to join us at some point. So for now, would you both like to introduce yourselves and your books? Let's begin with Andrena.
Let's begin with a coughing person, sorry. Hi, I'm Andrena Cordani. My debut book is called The Girl Who, and it came out in January this year, and it's about a girl called Leigh who was witness to the brutal murder, basically, of her mother and sister when she was 7 years old. And since then, she's 17 now, and her dad started a charity to kind of help make sure things like that don't happen again. And the case caused a lot of outrage at the time, so she's sort of famous for that. And her dad's just fallen in love and moved in with this new woman who has two children of her own, one of whom is Ellis, who's a sort of very flamboyant character who wants to be famous. Obviously not for that reason, but he wants to be famous. And so the two girls don't really get on, but Ellie's the only person that can spot that Leigh is secretly fantasizing about revenge and not as healthy as people think she is.
Yeah, I absolutely love this book, and I read it this year. It's so gripping, and the two voices are so distinct. It's absolutely brilliant. How about you, Sera? Would you like to introduce your latest?
My latest is This Can Never Not Be Real, which was out in April this year. It's set during a terror attack on a small town festival, and it follows 5 teenagers with nothing in common who have to come together in order to survive the night. And it's a minute-by-minute account of what happens in that one night.
And absolutely gripping as well. I mean, 5 different perspectives in that title, which is
5 perspectives, yeah.
Very impressive. And yes, just absolutely had me hooked from the first page right through to the ending, because I had to know what happened. For anyone who would like to know about my books, my most recent is Wicked Little Deeds, which is a horror thriller, and it tells the story of Ava, who becomes entangled in a murder investigation when dead bodies start turning up around her small spooky town, and they've all had their eyes gouged out. All the locals seem to believe that it might be the fault of the ghost who haunts the local waterfall, Burden Falls, but the police have their eyes very firmly fixed on Ava, so she has to figure out what's going on before she ends up in jail or much worse. So that's my latest. Let's go on to our first question then. What do you two think makes a good thriller, and are there any particular books or films that first made you a fan of the genre? Let's go to Sera.
So I don't watch an awful lot of thrillers. I think, although I write in this genre, it's more real life that's inspired me than books and films, particularly because I don't watch things that scare me. So I feel probably very out of place. I think the last thriller that I remember watching was The Day After Tomorrow, which I think must have been the 90s, but it scared the life out of me. When thrillers come out, I like to read the summaries on Wikipedia, and that's how I keep up with them. So early thrillers that I read were more sort of, I was a bit addicted to Criminal Minds for a while, but I started to find that I couldn't vacuum the house, because if I was vacuuming the house, I thought a murderer might come and get me and I wouldn't be able to hear them coming in. So I had to sort of decide between Criminal Minds or cleaning my home. And I had to give up on Criminal Minds. So yeah, it's not possibly my natural genre as a reader, but I find that I have a I have a very anxious nature, so I follow a lot of real life events very closely, and I think that a lot of my inspiration comes from real life, possibly rather than the genre itself. But I have read some thrillers. One of Us is Lying, books like that. I enjoy those very much. The sort of twisty, turny, psychological type thrillers are very, very good.
Yeah, that's absolutely one of my favourites as well. How about you, Andrea?
Oh, my mind's gone complete blank now. What makes a good thriller? Basically, um, I got into thrillers. I've always liked sort of page-turning stories. Where, like for YA, I'm a bit too old for point horror. Yeah, actually, I looked it up the other day because I was like, why didn't I ever read it? And it turns out I was kind of about sort of 19 when it first came out, and I think I was probably like swanning off, going, I don't want to read about high school. So I think that's why. But I loved Lois Duncan, which was kind of like the precursor to that, and that was always thriller. She wrote the original I Know What You Did Last Summer, and other kind of crimey ones like Killing Mr. Griffin, and then she also did kind of supernatural ones like Stranger with My Face. So she sort of, and those things really massively appealed to me. But it wasn't really until thrillers exploded a few years ago with the Gone Girl phenomenon that I started reading them as regularly as I had before. Before that, I was a big Barbara Vine fan, which is if people who don't know her, is the Ruth Rendell writing psychological thrillers, and she kind of I read a lot of those, and I just could never see the twist coming. Unfortunately now you can't you? Now you've written a few, but back then I just loved being completely gobsmacked and fooled.
Yeah, I've never read any Barbara Vine, I have to admit, but I think for me when I was a teenager, I absolutely devoured all of the Agatha Christie books. I had this massive collection of them all under my bed. So yeah, I think that was probably what piqued my interest in thrillers from a young age. I have some individual questions for you now. So, Andrena, one of the major themes in your book, The Girl Who, is forgiveness, especially the fact that Leigh has become kind of a poster child for forgiveness, even though she doesn't necessarily feel that on the inside. Was that a theme that you originally set out to explore with the book? Was that something that developed as you wrote it and with, the character development as well?
Yeah, I never set out to write a book with a theme about forgiveness. It came with the characters' voices, but also because before this I worked in women's magazines, and a lot of the time we would interview people who had been through something horrendous, some horrible experience, who had then gone on to start a charity to try and make sense of what happened, and to try and kind of turn it into something positive, which is all like really wonderful. But there was one person I remember who we interviewed who would just felt, I don't want to say who it was, but felt that they felt guilty. They could not rest from fundraising. They couldn't put it down for a second. They were haunted by this person that they had lost. That there was always like the person's face was on the on all the leaflets and the website, and had to talk about them all the time. And I just thought, how difficult would it be to come of age? Well, obviously grieving for this person, but still being constantly reminded of it all the time, and being expected to say the right thing and to be forgiving, while not being able to handle, not being allowed to feel angry and any rage about what happened, which is quite a natural part of the grieving process.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from.
But it certainly rings true, because you do hear a lot about, foundations being set up that way, from a traumatic event that's happened.
And not criticising it at all. Obviously, these people are amazing what they do. But yes, you have to be very strong to do it.
But it also makes you wonder about the emotions that, these people who do become, the figureheads for those sorts of foundations, you wonder a lot more about, the emotions that they're going through whilst they're doing this incredible work. So yeah, that's really fascinating in your book. Sera, this can never not be real. It offers a fresh take in that the villains are left anonymous. You don't see who the terrorists are, and you don't know what their motivation is behind attacking this event. Did you always intend to leave them as an anonymous threat, and what kind of challenges did that present to you as you were writing it?
I did always intend not to focus on the terrorists when talking about this attack. I think there's definitely a place for literature that explores what makes terrible people do terrible things. You know, I think that's why quite a lot of people are interested in true crime, because we are interested in motivations. But when talking about something that's quite real, and something that I think a lot of people worry about, when I hear about these attacks, I don't want to know about the people that have done this terrible thing. I want to know about the people that survive it. And I think that's where the inspiration and the hope comes from in those stories, in that there are always far more people that survive than anything else. And the incredible lives that many of them, just ordinary people that have been through this extraordinary thing, go on to live. And I think that in telling the survivor story, I didn't want to focus on the terrorists at all in that. I needed to know for myself what their motivations were. So in my head, I know exactly who these people are and what they want and why they're doing it. And I did, in the sort of edit stage, we did consider whether there should be a bit more information about how it comes to happen, what the reasons are. So I tried a few different things. I spoke to someone from a gun club about how easily it would be for people to get serious weapons in this country, which is unfortunately easier than you'd like it to be. And I wrote some other little sections which kind of had the townspeople talking about the event and exploring how it had come to pass or what they'd heard about it. But it took away the focus from the survivors of the attack, and that's really what I wanted the book to be about. So it didn't work when I did try to fit it in, and I didn't really want it there to begin with. So yeah, they were always going to be anonymous for me.
Yeah, I love that you left that element as a mystery, because it really sort of hones in the focus then on the characters and what they're going through.
Yeah, and I think in real life, I mean, I remember after the terror attacks in New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern was like, we're not going to mention this person's name on the news, we're not going to give him any energy or any airspace. And I just think that was such a powerful decision, and I think that's kind of what I've tried to do with this fictional version.
Absolutely. That leads in actually quite nicely to a question that we've had for you from Dawn. It's so interesting you avoid thrillers. What made you choose to write one?
Anxiety. My real life anxiety. I think whenever you see events like the terrorist attacks that we've all seen on the news, but not just terror attacks, all kinds of things, you think, how would I live through that? How would I survive? So I think it's a very vicarious experience writing it, in that it almost kind of helped me deal with that anxiety by finding closure and ways of coping with it and kind of writing my way through it. But yeah, it is just kind of an anxiety, a way of soothing my own anxiety, which I hope also helps other people that worry about these things, because they unfortunately are a part of our lives now. But we can't be afraid of them all of the time. We need to live.
Absolutely. All of the books, including Vincent's, offer more than one point of view. I'm interested to know what made you decide to write your books from more than one perspective. Let's go to Andreina.
So I weirdly, considering the whole book is about Leah, I started off writing from Ellie's perspective, because I don't know, her voice came first. And then it wasn't until really I'd gone a couple of chapters with Ellie that I thought, this is ridiculous. You know, she's sitting there thinking, what's going on in this girl's head? We need to know what's going on in this girl's head. So then Leah came in, and her voice was very natural. The voice that came in last was Boyd, who is the killer, who and that was a friend of mine read an early version and suggested that I tried it, and it was really interesting because it came really naturally, and it added an extra element to it, because basically, as well as Leah becoming sainted by the media and by public perception, this guy becomes demonized, and you know, he's a gang member and he's troubled, and people, you know, they use him to kind of push anti-drugs messages, and they use him to, you know, stigmatize mental health, and actually he's struggling as much as everybody else, and he's done something completely unspeakable. But at the same time, you get a little chink of light in there where he's done something monstrous, but we can understand what, you know, where he's coming from a bit more. And like, that was the one that came the most naturally, and it was only small. And I remember thinking, I'm writing this suspiciously quickly, I'm going to have to redraft it 15 times. And I didn't really. I just went back and tweaked a few things, and, you know, made sure that the timelines added up and everything. But yeah, it was really interesting, actually. And I did enjoy, I can't say which, I think I might have enjoyed writing Ellie the most, just because she's got a fun voice. But Leah was probably, you know, you get to explore some really deep, dark stuff. So that was fun too.
Yeah,
but it's nothing compared to writing Sera's perspectives. It's, when I read This Can Never Not Be Real, just switching actually on the page from person to person and holding all those different tones of voice in your head. That must have been mind-boggling at times.
Weirdly enough, it's like you say, it happened incredibly quickly, and it just kind of, I always say it kind of wrote itself. So I never intended to write multiple perspectives. When I first thought of the book, it was going to be, I think it was Ellie that came first for me. And I was initially thinking it would just be one person's perspective going through. And then I kind of left the idea. I wrote about half a page and then just sort of left the idea for a while. And a few months later, just woke up in the middle of the night with the whole plot in my head. And I sat up about 2 a.m. and wrote 2 pages of a plot outline, and then wrote the rest of the book in a month. And just they just talk to each other, and it actually helped me write, to have all these different perspectives. And I just don't think in that situation it's very hard to just get in one person's head and deal with that level of terror for a whole chapter. It works better to jump into different people and see where they're going. It's almost a cinematic kind of scene change. And it also meant I have quite a large area. There's a big outdoor area, and then there's this house with different rooms, and people are in different places, and you see them trying different things, and you might know from one other person's point of view that what this other person is doing is dangerous, because you know that they've been there and something scary is down there. So it let me tell a broader story by jumping around. But I had never seen a book written where sometimes my perspective changes mid-sentence. It just kind of happened, but it helped me tell the story. So I just let them talk, really.
Yeah.
Were your editors on board with that?
What was that?
I said, were your editors on board with that? Were they sort of up for the challenge? Yeah,
there was a brief discussion of separating all of the different voices out into different mini books and seeing what that looked like, but we didn't actually do that. But there's an audiobook for it, and the audiobook director was like, whew, this is quite a challenge with 5 different main voices, and then I had, I think, 4 or 5 different secondary voices, and we got students from East 15 Drama School to do the voices, which has worked brilliantly. And then I'm like, I've got 11 points of view in my next book. So I think it's become a me thing now. But yeah, I really enjoyed that style of writing, and you never get bored, because if you're head jumping, I write linearly, but I would get little bits of someone's reaction to something that I would then write down, and sometimes that would help me go on to the next chapter, because I'd know that I was getting to this interesting little bit of dialogue that I wanted to get to. So it was a good way of pulling me along as I wrote.
Yeah, it was a fascinating format, because it was almost a script, the way it would just have one sentence from, you know, giving a reaction, as you just said. It was just incredibly well done. It just draws you in, gives you that switching perspective, but it's like watching a documentary about it, which is something that, you know, you might do after something like a terrorist attack.
I mean, I think that there's 2 things that kind of probably influence me, which one probably is documentaries, where you get those different talking heads, but also after the Utoya attack, I remember I was off school, and there were it was the early days of Twitter, I think, and there were live tweets of the trial when the children were speaking, and it was so powerful just seeing these one tweet descriptions of what they were saying. That's always stuck with me, and I think that did probably influence the quickfire description that I used here.
Yeah. I will just pause for 1 second to say that unfortunately Vincent hasn't been able to join in. We've tried everything and the technology has let us down, but you know, everybody should definitely check out Vincent's books. They're amazing. And if you like Andrena's and Sera's and mine, I think you'll definitely like Vincent's books. So let's talk a bit about lead characters, because I think you both create amazingly relatable lead characters, and their voices, despite having, you know, more than one point of view, they're all very distinct. How do you go about fleshing out your main characters, and do you think that a lead character in a thriller has to have specific characteristics? Let's start with Sera.
I mean, mine has 5 main characters. I think all my characters are main characters. So they don't have to have specific personalities because they have very different personalities. What I do think they need is a reason to survive, and a reason to want to keep going. And they need a sense of momentum. So you can't really have a character that would just hide for the whole thing. You might have I do have a character, Violet, who sort of starts off and she's got a personality that she would just shut herself in a room and hope no one comes in that room. So she's kind of, I had to give her another character that would pull her along a bit more. But also I think once you force the character out of that room, they then have to be self-motivating and they then have to pull you along through the book. You can't just have a character that gets pushed around by circumstance. And also, I think characters that you want to survive probably are quite important in thrillers. Certainly unlikable characters are a good time to write. And you can have an unlikable character that you're very much rooting for to get through the story. So I think that's probably a much harder challenge. But yeah, characters that you want to survive. But I think the motivation is probably the main thing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you about the enjoyable nature of writing unlikable main characters. I tend to do that a bit myself. How about you, Andrena?
I think I don't know if the thriller has to have a particular kind of character. I think it's obviously somebody. I mean, I suppose with thrillers you can have 2 kinds of main characters. The first character is, you know, your Jack Ryan person who you're thinking, haha, those kidnappers don't know what they're taking on, kind of thing. And then the other one is the characters that I normally write, which is somebody who is completely not equipped for this and has been thrust into this situation, and has to deal with it. And that's obviously I think those characters are much more relatable, and you know, especially for psychological thrillers, you don't want them to be, you know, suddenly whip out their karate skills or whatever. But they do have to, I think they have to have a secret advantage where nobody else has, you know, just some kind of maybe a greater insight or just, you know, a little bit of a character trait that means that they are the people that can get to the truth, or they are the people that can survive. But yes, that it has to be, I think they just have to be really relatable. With Ellie, I set out to create a character that actually wasn't an angsty teenager, because I think a lot of teenagers aren't all tortured and full of, I mean, obviously there's heavy stuff going on at the moment and people are having lots of mental health issues. But at the same time, you know, at the time I was writing this, I think there's a lot of teenagers who were just really excited about life and just wanted to go out and be creative and have their friends. And I kind of wanted to create someone like that who was then thrust into a situation of doom, with Leigh, who was obviously, you know, in a very bad place. So that's what kind of interested me about those two, where they played off against each other.
Yeah, I did love them both, and Ellie in particular, I really loved her. The only thing that would have made me throttle her was the glitter.
Yeah, that happened to me. Someone threw glitter. I had just gone through a breakup. I had come out to a club, and you know, my friends were trying to cheer me up by taking me to the cabaret night, and halfway through the night, like, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm never going to meet anyone again. Someone throws a pot of freaking glitter on me. And I'm looking at
not what you want.
the twinkling lights falling towards me and just silently crying inside. Really, I'm scarred.
Oh, that sounds like something from Muriel's wedding or something like that. Oh, that's awful. But yes, I would
For people
describe.
who haven't read the book, my character throws pots of glitter in the air when she gets overexcited.
Sorry, I should have said that. It wasn't just about glitter in general.
I've done that to myself, trying to make a Bookstagram post with like glitter in the background. I upended it all over my room. And I think it's still sparkly now, to be fair.
I was going to say, I bet you've still got it. You still find it in your carpet.
Yeah, it lived with me for a long time.
Somebody once said to me, glitter is the herpes of the craft world.
Yeah,
just skipped around.
That is an apt description, I would say. I would describe your books as having heart. So what I mean by that is like the connections that grow between the characters, whether that's romance, whether it's sisterhood in the case of The Girl Who, or found family as well in the case of Sera's book. I think they're as vital to the story as the action and the mystery that's unfolding. And is that something that you would look for in the thrillers that you read? Or in your case, Sera, if you don't read them as much, is that something that definitely makes you want to write thrillers more than the action and mystery elements?
I think yes. I mean, I think any story, you need characters that care about things.
Mm-hmm.
In order to care about them, you see what they care about is kind of your window to their soul. And in the way I was telling this, it kind of brought these teenagers together who were very different personality types. I have occasionally described it as the Breakfast Club with terrorists. Oh,
hey,
hi.
Hello.
We got you in the end.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
We are delighted to be able to join us.
I know you're near the end, but I wanted
Vincent,
to.
ladies and gentlemen.
Hello. I'm sorry. It was a nightmare.
It's good to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I think you have to speed run all the questions really quickly.
Don't worry. I'll just answer the ones at the end, but I'm sorry to interrupt, but thank you.
As you're joining us now, would you like to just tell everybody who's watching what your book's about? And we'll continue with the questions from there.
Yeah. So my name's Vincent Ralph, and I'm the author of Are You Watching? And more recently, Lock the Doors. Lock the Doors is the story of Tom, who moves with his family into their dream home, but he starts seeing sort of clues to an unknown mystery, and he doesn't know if he's being paranoid or if there's something more sinister. He then befriends the girl who lived there before him, Amy, and he has to figure out if his dream home was her nightmare.
It's an excellent book. And as we were just talking about books that have big heart to them, and the growing relationships between the characters, it's just as vital to the story as that mystery element. How do you approach that with writing thrillers? Is that something that you look for in the ones that you read as well?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
I think heart, and I like to write a story where you feel as well, whereas you're not just sort of experiencing on a surface level, but you're also kind of really tapping into the emotion behind the characters. I think in part that comes because I very much wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm quite an emotional person, and I think that just comes across in my writing. And in terms of other thrillers, I would say definitely it helps if you can relate to the character. If there's peril, then it's always going to be worse if you feel genuinely, I do not want this person to kind of go through these terrible things. So by creating a more rounded character, I think it then means that you have a more effective thriller.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Do you, Andrena?
Yeah, no, completely. I think that's what pulls me in. It's the characters, you know, obviously a great premise will always get you going, oh, but it's the voice of the main characters, and I just I wouldn't read a book that didn't have that, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I have to say the same, to be honest. It's the fact that you care about the characters, as you were just saying, that it pulls you along with the story. I mean, no matter what's happening, if you care about the characters, you're going to want to read to the end, aren't you? So, our next question then. What are some of your favourite recent thrillers, or all-time favourites, or any that you think would make a particularly good Halloween read, even if it's outside the thriller genre? Sarah?
I've got some with me. So I do occasionally read scary things. So two that I've read recently-ish. It's not YA. It's Ian Reid, I'm Thinking of Ending Things. She's kind of a ghost story and a thriller. It's a very, very slow growing thriller. It's very, very scary by the end. Very psychological, but also supernatural. So that freaked me out quite a bit. So that's a very good Halloween read. It's also very short, so you can read it in one night and scare yourself. Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, which is again another supernatural. You can probably see the edge of the kind of thrillers that I do read are often a bit spooky. This is set at Yale, one of the major universities in America, which my friend works at. And I went to visit her before this book came out, and she took me on a little tour. And they have these secret societies which have these clubhouses, and some of them have skulls and things over the doors, and they're very secret society, a bit like the kind of old boys clubs in London, I guess. But yeah, for very rich people. And this kind of makes them magical societies where they use their magical powers to become the elite and to do terrible things to people. So it's a good read and quite a good thriller. But these are, when I said I didn't read scary things, Sandman is going to become a Netflix series very soon. So I recommend reading Sandman. The first one, Preludes and Nocturnes, I loved Sandman. I got into it when I was about 16 because someone told me that I reminded them of Delirium, who's kind of the slightly kooky one. So I started reading them. I love Sandman. This one has a story in it called 24, which is set in a 24-hour diner, which is one of the scariest things I've ever read. Read it when I was 16. It lives with me. I'm going to reread this before the Netflix series. And also, there is a series of Lucifer. This is Mike Carey's Lucifer. But read the graphic novels because they're not a police procedural. They are much more scary. They've got lots of Norse mythology and ancient gods and scary things in. So for my Halloween reads, Sandman and Lucifer, very, very good choices.
They sound amazing, and I've heard all good things about them. I have to admit, though, I didn't realise that Lucifer differed that much from the TV series. I've never read.
I can't watch the TV. I'm sure the TV series is fantastic. I really like the actor. I can't watch it because they're not my characters. I love the graphic novels so much, but they're really powerful and spooky and about real battles between gods and monsters, and they're great. But read Sandman first because they set up. If you've read Sandman, it really sets up Lucifer.
I haven't, but it's going right up my reading list right now.
You will. Oh, Kat, you would love Sandman. You must read Sandman. Tell me what you think when you have read it because you will love it.
I will do that. How about you, Vincent? What would you recommend for Halloween?
In terms of Halloween, I would say House of Leaves is probably the sort of scariest, strangest, weirdest book that I've ever read in the best possible way. It's just incredibly immersive. If any of you have read it, it's the way that the words are presented on the page, and it is just like nothing else. It's a work of genius. So I would say that one. But in terms of thrillers, I love Gillian Flynn. So anything that she's written, obviously Gone Girl is the biggest one that she's done, but I also like the other books that she's written, so Dark Places and Sharp Objects. And Misery in Stephen King is one of the kind of the best examples of a thriller that I've ever read. The scene where he's desperately trying to escape and she's coming home and he has to sort of crawl through the house. I still get that sense now, years later, that horrible sense. It was kind of the most scared I'd ever been reading a book.
Yeah, I have to admit that I have seen Misery. I have never actually read the book, but I think I'm probably going to have to that. But mentioning House of Leaves, though, I've got a copy of that was bought for me by Dawn Kurtagich, who is watching us. And she also writes books that have real interesting layout, and they're absolutely terrifying as well. So I'm going to recommend Dawn's books for anybody who's looking for something to read this Halloween, because they're all brilliant and gothic and weird. And how about you, Andrena? What would you recommend?
Well, since Sera mentioned graphic novels that got made into series that are a bit different, that Lock and Key, the original Lock and Key graphic novel, is so creepy. And I much prefer it to the series. And the series is okay, but they just sort of jumped forward and they missed out a few elements that I found extra scary, that I'm like, why did they leave it out? So yes, I would recommend the Lock and Key graphic novels. I would recommend recent thrillers. I read The Other People by C.J. Tudor, which has been on my TBR pile forever and ever since it came out. And that just the concept of a guy driving through in a traffic jam on the way home sees his child banging on the rear window of the car in front of him, saying, "Help me, Daddy." I mean, He Said, She Said, for Erin Kelly is another thriller that I sort of shove into people's hands regularly if they're into thrillers. And for twists, Fingersmith is still the best twist that I've ever, like, I just did not see that coming. It's like the gold standard of twists.
Yeah. Well, you've given me loads to add to my reading list, and hopefully everybody who's watching has had loads to add to theirs as well. We've had some questions in from people watching. The first one was, what genre would you write if you weren't going to write thriller ever again? Let's go to Sera.
I'm going to say fantasy, even though I haven't technically written a fantasy, because I intend to write a fantasy and maybe it'll make me do it. But yeah, fantasy is probably my first love, so I definitely would write that genre.
Wonderful. How about you, Vincent?
It might come as a surprise, but I would say children's books. So it's quite a left field turn, but yeah, if I could only write, not necessarily a genre, but sort of picture books and middle grade.
Excellent. How about you, Andrena?
My answer is all of them, because I'm really greedy and I actually want to write all of them, and I find it really hard to think of myself as a particular genre writer, because I just want to write everything.
I think I'm similar to you in that way. I mean, loosely, my books, I've written 5 books now, and loosely they all come under thriller, but one is more of a contemporary fantasy thriller, one is a sci-fi thriller, I've written 2 horror thrillers, so I don't like to be put in a box either. Another question that we've had, what was your reaction the first time you saw your book covers, and what was the cover process like for you? We'll go in reverse order this time. Andrena?
The Girl Who was really tough, I think, for them. I don't know, it just took a while for them to get back to me, and the concept they originally said they were interested in just didn't materialize, so I think they probably tried it out and it didn't work. It's a tricky book because it doesn't have a strong visual, it doesn't have a totem like a Mr. Jitters or a lock, or it just didn't have anything like that, so I was completely mystified what they'd come up with. So when I first saw it, I was a bit surprised, and I was a bit, I don't know, wasn't sure, and then I've just grown to really love it, because it is really distinctive, and I like the colours and the blurring and everything, and yeah, I think the cover artist did a really good job, and he did Dead Lucky as well, which is my next book, which is a completely different cover and much brighter. And
but still sort of tone in with it, doesn't it, with the sort of turquoisey colour?
It's a much lairier turquoise, but it's a much lairier subject matter, so it does fit in. They don't really match up on the shelves, but I love both of them.
Yeah.
And I do think it does make a difference, though. This is a very muted cover, and I do think that the covers with the zingy styles do attract a lot of attention, so we'll see.
Although I would say that the girl who has a cover that is so distinctive, I immediately recognise it, even without glasses on. So, yeah,
That's true.
doing its job. How about you, Vincent? What did you think the first time you saw your cover?
In terms of Lock the Doors, I loved it. So I love that kind of that really stark contrast, the yellow and the black. And I love there's lots of little things that perhaps people don't even notice. So I've got a copy here, but I like the fact that the L kind of looks almost like a shadow at the bottom into the key. I really like that. I love all the little sort of matchstick people that are in it. But there's also the designer created, so they made shiny, which isn't the technical term, but just certain letters of the title and of the sort of 3-line description on the front, so that it spells out "help me," but it's something that no one would notice, and I know because they told me. But I just love those tiny little bits. In terms of Are You Watching, I wasn't as enamoured from the outset. I think it's hard sometimes because you imagine that you're going to love it, and I just wasn't sure. And I grew to really like it. But it was interesting that the American version, which is called 14 Ways to Die, they went in a completely different direction. And again, it's very bold, the red on the white. And I love that one. So it's interesting how different people perceive the same story when it comes to the covers.
Yeah, definitely. I've had some different covers, UK versus US editions have been very different for my books. Yeah, I can appreciate that. How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about the different editions of my one, because I shared a picture of one edition recently, which is certainly interesting. So this is the cover to This Can Never Not Be Real. And I really like it. The title of the book was something that took me a little while to get used to, because when I wrote it, it was called The Lucky Ones. So it changed quite dramatically. This is a line that's in the book, and I think the line itself kind of stands out. So when we eventually went for this line, we kind of decided to do a text cover because it's a long title and also just it stands out that way. But I love the fact they did that sort of spot UV sort of light up fireworks sparkler effect, which kind of it captures both the fire of the night but also a little bit of the hope maybe in the sort of the light in the darkness. And then we had some discussions about, because we had some sort of we've got red sort of dots here, and they were a bit more soft focus and lovely, and it looked a bit romantic at first, and now they're a bit more blood splattery. So we kind of made it a little bit darker in that way. But yeah, I've seen the German cover, which has, I think it's someone in a balaclava with a lot of blood going on, lots of blood, which startled me a bit because, as we talked about, the book is not really about the terrorists, and it kind of looks like it shows a terrorist, but then Kat told me it looks like the dark face of evil or something like that, so I'm going with it being the dark face of evil now. Or like, was it the dark face of all of their different fears?
See, when I looked at that, the immediate impression I had was that it's just like sort of eyes cut out of a dark face, which you interpreted as a balaclava.
Yeah.
I thought that was just like the faceless fear that it brings all of the characters together. So it's the one thing that connects them all is the fear of this, it's a faceless
Which I like.
fear.
So I'm going with that explanation rather than big scary terrorist. But also it's like, it's very striking. It's just very striking in a very different way. So I think that's one that I'm sort of getting used to, but I can certainly see that it's you'd pick up and have a look at it because it's quite a scary cover. So yeah, very striking, very different. It is fascinating to see. I've also seen the Japanese cover, which is very different again. So yeah, I love seeing different people's interpretations of things. Also, we've been going through the cover process of the next book, which has gone through loads more edits than this one did. This one was like, yeah, we're going for that, we're just going to edit it a bit. The next one has gone through lots of changes, so it's fascinating. I'm fascinated by all the cover design. I have not got an artistic bone in my body, so I love watching what other people can do with it.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I admire people greatly who have like artistic talent as well as being able to write. That is not me. So we're drawing close to 8 o'clock now, so I'll just ask one more question. And as we're in Halloween week, Have you ever had a spooky encounter of your own, or do you have like a local urban legend that is a good spooky story for Halloween? Let's start with Vincent.
Yeah, this is a strange one because it happened quite a long time ago, so I'm not sure how much has sort of been embellished by my own imagination. Yeah, when I was a child, I think I was about 4 or 5, and I used to sort of just play in my room and play with an imaginary friend. My mum would ask, "Oh, who are you playing with?" And I would say, "Oh, I'm playing with this little boy." I can't remember what I called him. But one night, the way our house was we had the stairs that sort of came down and separated the lounge and the dining room. And it was just a very long house. So if you were in the kitchen, you could see right through the stairs and then into the lounge. I was asleep in bed. My mum was in the kitchen. She saw me walk down the stairs, and rather than come towards her, I turned the opposite way and went into the lounge. Obviously, it was quite late at night, so she followed me and to take me back to bed. But when she walked into the lounge, there was nobody there. And then she ran straight back up the stairs, and I was fast asleep. So there was no way that I could have snuck past her if it was me. So over the years, we have suggested that this little boy that I used to play with was perhaps the same little boy that she saw walking down the stairs in the house.
Ooh, that is so creepy.
Story.
That is perfect for Halloween. How about you, Andrew?
Oh, well, it's a slight change of mood here. I haven't ever not had any massively spooky experiences, so I looked up some local myths and legends, and Dorset is home to the Mer chicken, half chicken, half tenacious bearded man-woman with leg half a yard long. The Mer chicken, giant poultry, was seen walking on water outside Portland. So I love that. And then the other one is the Chapwick Monster. So there was a village of Chapwick in 1705. They were a fishmonger basically was driving his catch in the cart through this village, which is not close to the sea. Crab falls off. They all look at the crab, run away from the crab, and think it's Satan. And the fishmonger comes back a couple of hours later looking for his crab, with everyone in the village is running around trying to exorcise it. So yeah, those are my local myths and legends. They're suitably ridiculous.
Oh, that's brilliant. How about you, Sarah? Do you have any spooky encounters?
I do, although I'm just thinking about a mer chicken and thinking, like, are we sure a chicken that walks on water isn't maybe a duck? Maybe. I've had a few spooky encounters, but I'm going to talk about my mum's spooky encounter. When she moved to Guildford to go to drama school, she lived in an upstairs room of a house owned by some family friends. So the ground floor was a jeweller's, and then upstairs they had flats that they rented out to drama students. And my mum's bed used to pick up in one corner and tap as she was laying on it. And it would do it when other people were in there. So it wasn't just her. They used to see it pick up and tap. And there also used to be, in the middle of the night, they would all hear someone running down this set of stairs that was no longer there. There used to be a spiral staircase going down the building, and it wasn't there anymore, but they could still hear someone running down. And then I went on a ghost tour of my town, and that house is where the last person that was hanged in Guildford ran and hid, and they hid in one of the upstairs rooms. So we thought they probably ran up the stairs and then hid under the bed. And that's probably why it was tapping. But yeah, so that's my spooky story.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I have one. It's not exactly spooky, but it explains where Mr. Jitters came from, so I suppose that's kind of spooky.
I always wondered if he was related to Slender Man, because he reminds me a bit of Slender Man.
There is, I definitely feel like there was a bit of Slender Man that inspired him, but more or less was based on a sleep paralysis dream that I had. I was lying in bed and I could see the light coming in through the door from the hallway. But as I was looking, and you know, as tends to happen in a sleep paralysis dream, I couldn't move. I could see this like bone white face, just like the top half of it moving around the edge of the bed, watching me, and I knew it was some like demonic creature. So yeah, woke up screaming that time, which is always fun. And Mr. Jitters was born.
And he is terrifying, so
Yeah, that's where he came from.
you just inflicted him on everyone else. That was great.
Yeah, that's what I said.
What else does one do with trauma? And on that note, we do have the winner of the giveaway to announce, who has won a copy of This Can Never Not Be Real, of Lock the Doors and Harrow Lake, and the winner is Books by Nature on Instagram. So I will get in touch with you and find out your address so we can send you those books. Congratulations. And thank you very, very much to all three of you for joining me for this Killer Thrillers panel. We got there in the end. It was a good one. It was really, really fun, and the last of the live panels for Killer YA-Con, so I'm really chuffed to have been able to chair it. So,
Thanks for being a fantastic host, Kat.
Great, thank you so much.
I will say good night to everyone who's watching.
Good night, spooky dreams.